I'm happy to be here today to get to talk to you guys, and I'm sorry I'll probably be t talking a lot to you instead of us having a conversation. But I wanted to provide information about the HOPE Science, which stands for Healthy Outcomes Through Positive Experiences. And hope is not a manualized evidence-based practice. It's more of a framework which is grounded in principles of strengths-based, child-centered, family-led care, and it seeks to promote access to key positive experiences within four building blocks that we'll talk about just a little bit later. What I like about the Hope framework is that it can be integrated into what you're already doing, and you can just layer it into work that's already happening to, you know, potentially enhance some of the work that you're already doing. Let's see, as we get into it, I'm becoming a hope facilitator because I believe so strongly in the power of positive experiences. And, the vision of the Hope National Resource Center is, having a world that recognizes, honors, and promotes positive experiences because they're fundamental to our health and well-being. There's a lot of conversations that happen around how trauma can impact health and well-being. And that's something that I'm really interested in. And what has sort of tipped the scale for me is learning more about the strong impact of positive experiences, even in the face of adversity. So, to begin, I'd love to know a little bit from you. What do you already know about positive childhood experiences? And I'm going to launch this poll for you. If you would just take a couple of minutes to complete that. Looks like most people have responded, maybe just a minute more or so, um, so that we can hear from more people. Okay. Do you know, I thought I should have done two different polls. I have a second. Was somebody going to say something? Okay. Let me just tell you what the results say, because I have one more question I'm going to ask you afterward, and I don't think that I can show your first question until I finish the poll. That was not good thinking on my part. But it looks like 16% say nothing. What are positive childhood experiences? Um, 30% say a little, like I've heard this term before. 37% say more than a little, but I still have a lot to learn. And then 17% say I'm well versed in positive childhood experiences and their effects. And then 2% say I'm a positive childhood experiences expert. I am so glad to know that. Those of you who are already well versed or, know a little, if you ever want to add anything to what I'm saying, I'd love to hear it. And let's see, I guess I can end the poll. Oh, did it show you both? Sorry. Um, okay, I'm gonna end it for now. And then I guess you guys can see the results. Well, we'll come back to that just a little bit later. Uh-oh, I'm not able to get that. Oh, there we go. To disappear from now. All right. Thank you guys for being patient with me. So, today we're going to be doing a crash course in positive childhood experiences then. And, as we begin, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we've learned more about positive childhood experiences. This is quote unquote the new science that talks about how positive childhood experience or how positive experiences can affect our health. In 2015, there was the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System survey that happens, every year in all 50 states. And it collects data from US residents about their health-related risk behaviors, chronic health conditions, and in Wisconsin in 2015, they asked not only about ACEs or adverse childhood experiences, but they also asked about positive childhood experiences. And that was the very first state to begin to ask about positive childhood experiences. There were over 6,000 surveys that were completed. And, you know, I might note that in Wisconsin, it's a very white state and the data is maybe not necessarily representative of the United States as a whole. So um, they looked at positive childhood experiences and wanted to look at the relationship with mental health. These are the questions that they ask. So these 7 questions. And maybe you could think about your own experiences as a child. So the participants could answer never, sometimes, almost always, or always. And um, if somebody said almost always or always, that gets you 1 point. So if you say just sometimes you felt able to talk to your family about feelings, that wouldn't earn a point on this scale. The total number that a person could get would be 7. Okay. And these were the results. It's kind of amazing. If you look at people who had 0, 1, or 2 yeses, so said almost always or always, 51% of them had, strong mental health. Of those over like 6,000, almost 200 people who responded, if they got 3 to 5, had 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences, then 75% of them reported good mental health. And for those people who had 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences, 87% of them had good mental health. And this is them thinking back to their childhood before the age of 18. So it's sort of interesting to see that. And this was really kind of the beginning of the look at positive childhood experiences quite intentionally. And since then, there's been a lot of work done. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk to you about today. Um, you know, just looking across different studies and then getting into the building blocks. So there was combined data between 2015 and 2020 from Kansas, Montana, South Carolina, and Wisconsin. And people who reported having 3 to 5 or 6 to 7 positive childhood experiences were less likely to report having any common chronic physical health conditions. So the more positive childhood experiences that somebody reported, then the more the likelihood of having some chronic condition was reduced. So there was this direct relationship. We see when they had, we see the person with no positive childhood experiences. And then for the person who had 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences, they were 12% less likely to report chronic health conditions. And then for people who had 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences, they were 22% less likely to have chronic health conditions. If we look in California in 2023, what they found was that the more positive childhood experiences an adult recalled, then the lower their alcohol and cigarette consumption was in adulthood. They also reported having less experiences of depression and better overall health. And, of course, all of these are self-reports. In 2021 in Tennessee, again, just asking about health-related conditions and behaviors and also positive childhood experiences. Once again, we see lower rates of depression, lower rates of heart disease, better physical health, and people were more likely to be employed the more positive childhood experiences that they've had. So for those of you who have heard about ACEs, we have heard a lot about the dose-dependent responses, so that the more ACEs a person has, the more likely they are to have, some sort of disease in adulthood. Well, we're seeing similar results for positive childhood experience in terms of protecting health. And, as we get into health behaviors, in, the 2019 data out of Montana show that the more positive childhood experiences an adult remembered in their childhood, then the lower the likelihood that they used any substances. They reported less cigarette smoking, less alcohol consumption, and then lower lifetime odds of, any drug use at all. So individuals reporting those highest levels, 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences, had a 68% reduced risk of having ever been a cigarette smoker compared to those with the lowest levels of positive childhood experiences, like 0, 1, or 2. And, if we were to look at those individual items from the positive childhood experiences survey, the ones that seem to be related to the greatest risk reduction were feeling like their family stood by them during difficult times. That had a 46% decreased risk of being a cigarette smoker, feeling safe and protected by an adult in their home. That had a 45% reduced risk, and then enjoying participating in community traditions had a 42% reduced risk. And while all of those positive childhood experiences seem to be important, feeling safe and protected by an adult in the home had the greatest impact on reducing alcohol use for those individuals in Montana. And, if we think a little bit more, people who had the most positive childhood experiences reported a 71% lower risk of lifetime substance use. So that includes like cocaine, crack, heroin, methamphetamines, um, you know, sedatives, stimulants, any of them compared to them, the other folks reporting zero, one, or two. So it's sort of interesting to think about what might be going on here. Again, in Kansas, Montana, South Carolina, and Wisconsin, that combined data between 2015 to 2020. So that's thousands and thousands of people. Um, Adults who reported having 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences were 21% less likely to smoke 100 cigarettes in their lifetime. And then people with 6 to 7 positive childhood experiences um, had a 36% reduced risk. So there, I think you can see some of that dose-dependent response. Those people with 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences were 46 or 40% less likely to report depression, and people reporting 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences were 68% less likely to report depression. It's really interesting to think about these as we think about teenagers. The HOPE framework, there was a longitudinal study out of Australia that followed 5,000 kids from birth through adolescence. And they found that, the more positive childhood experiences that a child reported in adolescence, then, the better mental health and better academic skills they had in adolescence. And, just to, did somebody have a question? Okay. Um, just to talk a little bit more, they conceptually mapped, their items to the positive and adverse youth experiences. And they were looking at 15, 16, and 17-year-olds. They talked to them then and then again at age 25. And what they found was that, the higher number of adverse experiences were associated with poorer health, education, and employment outcomes, but the higher number of positive experiences was correlated with positive outcomes as well. And the people who had positive experiences had much greater odds at having better general and mental health outcomes, even after like taking ACEs into account. And, if we look at, college education and income later in life, you know, people who reported having any number of positive childhood experiences were more likely to have a college education and an income over $50,000 than those people who reported zero positive childhood experiences. And the more positive childhood experiences that a person reported, then the more likely they were to receive a college education and that higher income. So the likelihood of receiving a college education for those who reported no positive childhood experiences was 40%. Um, and if we think about those who experienced 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences, then that rose to 58% who received a college education. And then for those, oh, and then it went up to 67% for those people who reported 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences. And then, the the rates were similar for those who reported an income over 50,000. It was 28% of those who had 0 positive childhood experiences had an income over 50,000. 46% of those who reported 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences had an income over 50,000, and 59% who had 6 or 7 ACEs. So, these are interesting to see. And here you can look at the data from 2021 for, this is aggregate data from Wisconsin, Montana, South Carolina, and Kansas again. And we see, people with 1 or 2 positive childhood experiences in blue, those who had the 50% income or income over $50,000 was less than 10% for, those in those states. Same for a college degree. If we look at employment, just being employed, 10% of them were employed as well. Then if we look at those with 3 to 5 in orange, 30% of them had over a $50,000 a year income, and close to 30% had a college degree, and just over 30% were employed. And then if we look at those with 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences, over 60% had an income over 50,000 and a college degree, and just under 50% were employed. And this result held in those different states across race, socioeconomic status, and their geographic location, which is kind of interesting to think about. So I was looking for a little bit more information closer to home for us to think about. And we're in our behavior risk surveillance system, we're not currently looking at positive childhood experiences so that we could look, a little bit more deeply at the impact on health for folks in our state. But we do have some of that data with our youth. And what you know, we have data from the 2023 Utah Youth Risk Behavior System, which is part of our Student Health and Risk Prevention survey, which is our SHARP survey, right? And this right here, this is just looking at grades 9 through 12. And these are the number of our adolescents in 2023 who reported poor mental health in that like purplish color, purplish, I don't know, black almost. So poor mental health in the last 30 days, over 50% of them who had no positive childhood experiences reported poor mental health. If they just had 1 or 2 positive childhood experiences that they endorsed, then, a third of them experienced poor mental health in the past 30 days. And then if they just had 3, and there were only 3 positive childhood experiences that were, that could be extracted from that survey, but only 11% of those teens had poor mental health. And then similar for those considering suicide in the past year, almost half of those with no positive childhood experiences seriously considered suicide. 25% of those with one or two positive childhood experiences were seriously considering suicide, and 6% of those who had three. So, for me, what this says is we can always infuse positivity, right? And we we know that we can promote children's health and well-being through positive experiences, through having caregivers who are available and around. The issue is, and spending time with them. Do you know, we had an intervention called Better Together that we implemented where we were trying to build on positive childhood experiences. And it was just a 12-week intervention with 6 weeks on Zoom, 6 weeks online, just for the parents online to learn more about child development. And the 6 weeks on Zoom was focused on lots of really silly, fun activities for parents to do with their entire family. And a year later, we asked them what they learned from being part of Better Together. And one of the stronger responses we saw was just the importance of time, spending time with their kids, that they didn't have to do anything great. It was just having those connecting moments. And in the hustle bustle of life, and it seems like our lives are getting so much busier, we don't always, maybe we don't always intentionally spend time with our kids because we don't know that this might be something really important. And so for me, as I learn more about positive childhood experiences, I just think about how critical it is to help parents understand some of these things and see that we really don't need to do much at all to really help kids know that they're connected. And when parents know better, they do better, and they will intentionally show up for their kids. And so, as we get into the, so what piece, for me, that's a big so what. We know that these positive childhood experiences or these positive experiences allow kids to form strong relationships, connections. They help to cultivate this positive self-image and self-worth. When kids have somebody who pays attention to them, they love to have especially adult attention. And we can help build on all the strengths that they already have, even just by thinking developmentally where they are and giving them fun, challenging things to do and noticing and helping them think about what their strengths are. We also provide a sense of belonging and build resilience um, through positive experiences. All right, so you guys also did the poll on adverse childhood experiences, and um, 4% said, like, I don't know anything. What are ACEs? That's good to know. 7% said a little, like I've heard that term before. 32% said more than a little, but probably still have a lot to learn. 54% said I'm well versed in ACEs and their effects on health. And 4% said I'm an ACEs expert. So this is great to know. I'm just going to briefly talk about ACEs, and I would recommend that anybody who is not familiar with adverse childhood experiences, if you Google adverse childhood experiences, there will be a lot that will show up. But, in the original study, what they looked at um, were 10 things. They looked at abuse, so physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, Then they looked at neglect, physical and emotional neglect, and then different household challenges like having substance use in the home or misuse in the home, mental illness, or a person who's depressed, or a person who has attempted suicide in the home, um, divorce or separation, incarceration, intimate, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, in the home. So those were the 10 that were originally looked at. And then there's been additional work looking at the impacts of bullying, community violence, natural disasters, refugee or wartime experience, and then also just witnessing or experiencing terroristic acts. And as we think about that study, it first came out in 1998. There were over 17,000 people who were part of the study. And what was shocking was that over two-thirds of American adults in that um, system, it was actually the Kaiser Permanente healthcare system but over two-thirds had experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, and 12.5% had experienced four or more. And what they found was that, oh, maybe I should go to the next slide. Basically, ACEs are strongly correlated with long-lasting negative health, mental health, and societal impacts. So, if we think about traumatic brain injury, fractures, burns, the more adverse childhood experiences a person had, then the more likely they are to have these negative outcomes. Depression, anxiety, suicide attempts, post-traumatic stress disorder, unintended pregnancies, or pregnancy complications as well, and having their baby die after or after birth, or I'm sorry, in the womb. Sexually transmitted diseases, HIV, cancer, diabetes, alcohol, drug use, abuse, unsafe sex, heart disease, basically every everything that's been looked at to date has been every negative health outcome has had a dose dependent response. So, again, if you have one or two ACEs, you'd be more likely to have that negative health outcome like heart disease than a person who had zero. For a person who has four, they're more likely than the person with two or with zero, just to make sure that dose dependent makes sense for you. So, what this makes it look like is if you have a hard childhood, you might have a hard adulthood as well. And, I might here just talk about some of these community environments as well, because we know that, the soil that we grow up in makes a difference. Just like a plant, for those of you who are gardeners, the soil that we we have for our plants, if it's not well nourished, then the plant may not be well nourished. And similarly, for the environments that children grow up in, when they grow up in, areas of extreme poverty, discrimination, a lot of community disruption, lack of opportunity, whether that's economic, or social opportunity, poor housing, violence in their area. That is a hard soil to raise kids in. And and so the tree that we get and the leaves can be impacted. And what we see above ground are the actual ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences that we just talked about. Um, but I think it's really important to recognize that it's not just what happens in our home, but what happens in our community is important as well. And so again, this sounds like a sad story, but if we go back to that 2015 Wisconsin data where we saw that, the more positive childhood experiences that a person has, then the less likely they were to have, negative mental health. If we layer that here with ACEs, people who have four or more ACEs, those negative childhood experiences or adverse childhood experiences, what we see is that a person who has zero, one, or two positive childhood experiences and four or more ACEs, you know, approximately 60% of them in their early 20s, from that 2015 Wisconsin study, um, had depression or poor mental health in their early adulthood. If we look at those with 3 to 5 positive childhood experiences and four or more ACEs, less, just a little bit under 40% of them were experiencing depression or poor mental health. Then if we look at those with 6 or 7 positive childhood experiences and four or more ACEs, about 20% of them had um, poor mental health or were experiencing depression. So it's amazing to think about, even when hard things are happening, for lots of people, there are also positive things that are happening. And when these positive things are happening, that seems to create a buffer for a child in their adulthood, even though they've had these really hard things that happen. And, like I'm talking right now about positive childhood experiences, but let me say that what we're learning is the effect doesn't end. There's, Allie Crandall here in Utah at BYU is doing a lot of research around positive adult experiences. And what she's finding is, having a connected neighborhood and neighbors we can count on, people that we might be able to socialize with or know that they have our back, that makes a really big difference for our adult mental health as well. So the thing I love about positive childhood experiences is that when we have them, we are much more likely to be resilient. And what we're learning is that, if there's anybody here from the field of child welfare, you know that emotional neglect, kids who experience a lot of emotional neglect, they have some of the worst outcomes compared to kids who experience even severe physical abuse or other types of child maltreatment. And the hope here is that, as a former child welfare worker, when we work with parents to, help them understand more about what their kids need, they typically respond and want to do whatever they can for their kids. They just don't always know how to do that, right? And so, like, as I think about my work with people, trying to integrate positive childhood experiences and supporting parents in doing that can be really powerful. And, hope really is the now what to adverse childhood experiences. And, like, because, so many of us meet families after there's been some sort of trauma. And, we can't change an individual's trauma. We can't change a child's trauma. We can't change an adult's trauma. And but what we can change is that support after trauma. And of course, hoping to prevent future trauma whenever we can. But just by increasing those positive experiences. And even if it's a relationship with you, what we know from adverse childhood experiences research is that the biggest predictor of resilience is one caring adult, whether that's um, a coach, a child welfare worker, a teacher, a clergy member, a neighbor, whatever it might be, a parent, a grandparent. That is the key to resilience. It's that relationship. And, we should let that sink in that we can protect positive mental health for adults and for kids, even when there is trauma. All right, so what I want to do is get into the how. Um, as we think about the building blocks of hope, there are four evidence-based building blocks, and they can describe these some key positive experiences that are critical for healthy development. And you know, if we look at these here, relationships with other children, with adults in our homes, with adults outside of our homes, safe, equitable, and stable environments, places where we live, play, learn, at home, in school, in the community. The third one is social and civic engagement, where we have this sense of belonging and connectedness. And then the fourth is emotional growth through, our interactions with our peers, with our relationships with our, teachers at school, with our parents, helping to develop our self-regulation and our awareness of ourselves as well. So, as we think about these four building blocks, number one is relationships. This block emphasizes the, the importance of nurturing supportive relationships. And as we think about early secure attachments, that bond between the parent and a baby and young child and, teenager, how attachment is expressed over time might be changing a little bit, but helping children to feel secure in their relationships. And, kids need to have supportive relationships outside of their parents and caregivers, with other adults, with peers, with their teachers at school, with church leaders, with coaches, whatever opportunities that that child might have for building relationships. Uh, um, let's see. As we think about the environment building block, you know, kids need safe, stable, protective, and equitable environments where they live, learn, and play as well. So, this building block, includes some of those really critical things like food, shelter, clothing, heat, emotional safety. As we think about the point in time count occurring next week, where we get to learn more about the number of people who are unsheltered in Utah. this year, or, those 3 days. Um, what can we do to support people having safe environments to live, especially these days where, rents are so high, wages are not keeping up, and, just having a nurturing home where a child is emotionally secure, a stable school environment. We think about kids who have to move from school to school to school throughout the course of the year. And how are they doing? And how safe are they feeling when they have to continually disrupt their relationships and maybe go to new schools? And what are our community spaces like? What do our parks look like? How safe are they? Are there parks available for kids? Is there a place for people to gather and to be in community? And then as we think about social engagement, civic engagement, kids need to feel like they belong, that they matter to the people in the communities around them. And, we get some of this through church environments, through community activities as we participate. And this creates this idea that, they're part of something bigger than themselves, and that can help create a sense of purpose, a mattering, being involved in projects, in service activities, peer mentoring. Uh, all of these things can help. Maybe just cultural events, their own cultural groups, their family activities that they do, joining a music group, a sports group, some art program. These are ways that we can support that social and civic engagement as well. And then as we think about the emotional growth, you know, kids don't come here knowing how to control their emotions, right? And, that's the role of us as caregivers and as teachers, as service providers to support that emotional development of children and sometimes, lots of times, for adults as well. And, as we think about it for kids, they learn a lot just through their interactions with other kids. And when they have homes that support a lot of positive emotional growth and development, and where caregivers are use supportive strategies that help kids to then, do hard things, because it's not easy to wait when they want something right now. It's not easy to have to share, or, to not respond when they got hit by another kid. And so these are skills that we support their development over the course of time. And it takes all of us. It's not just a parent's role in the home, but, we do it and other environments as well. Teachers are doing it at school. I do it when I am with my grandkids and their friends, and they might be having a hard time sharing. Uh, we want to build on this block as well. So I wonder, how how do you promote equitable access to one or more of these building blocks? Like, um, you know, you might be doing several just in one program, like a mentorship program for high school students to get involved with their community, where they're learning skills and artistic activities that promotes engagement, safe environments, and relationships. And I know that you're already doing so much. I'm just going to look into the chat. I wonder if you guys would put some of the things that you're doing. Let's see. I'm trying to go through here. Oh, I see a casa. Um, I wonder if you guys would add anything to the chat potentially about what you are doing to support these building blocks? Like, how are you developing relationships in your work? Do you have programs where you're supporting that for kids? Um, Tammy says, I support schools to become trauma sensitive and create a wellness room as a tier 1 support. Oh, that's wonderful because then our teachers are doing even additional support. Um, Home visiting using parents as teachers, safe care, and the nurse family partnership. Beautiful. Toddler groups. Oh, I bet those are so fun to see. Um, oh, Susanna, I'm glad to see this, that Tammy helped you. And you have a Zen den. Um, oh my goodness, you guys are doing so many things. Um, Positive case management interactions. Thank you, Lily. Options to engage with community members. Um, oh, Matthew, you are probably doing so much for your cousin um, to help increase that connection. And this is the great thing, right? Um, our we are dynamic beings and we're growing and changing all the time. And just one small thing for a person can end up maybe not, we may not see the results right now, but down the road we can see um, such growth. Wow, you guys are doing amazing. Mandy, I see you say you work with adults currently. Everything that you're doing with the adults in these 4 areas, relationships, environment, engagement, and emotional growth, what you're doing is you're increasing those positive adult experiences, which so many of our adults who are struggling are parents. And so when we are supporting parents, we're really directly supporting kids as well. Um, so many things. Yeah. Just giving parents the permission to not be okay when they have a child with special needs. Absolutely. Home visits, handwritten letters to kids. Um, yes. And Monica, that or that safe and positive place for your child and teen clients, um, that makes such a big difference. I was working with a school teacher who was having some really hard times and experienced really a difficult childhood, who became a teacher because a teacher had positively impacted her, but her mental health spiraled at one point in time. And she just talked about how that one teacher had made such a big difference to her that she had wanted to be that support for others, and which, she had a spiral momentarily and, got through it because we all have hard times that we have to get through, right? And when we can surround ourselves with positive supports, we can get through it so much better. So as we think about what goes into the buckets, Hope has defined these 4 building blocks, but it's the community and the family that you're working with that, they get to think about what's important to them and, and how they define something. How does this family define a safe environment? And so much of that comes about from their previous experiences, right? So as we learn more about them, then we also learn more about their needs and their wants as well. And we can think about how their culture supports their emotional growth, how, um, how different opportunities for social and civic engagement might feel meaningful for one person, and a different way to be involved can feel meaningful for somebody else. So, we don't decide those things, of course. People decide that for themselves. And, like I alluded to before, it's not just kids who need building blocks, because as you think about our brains, we need access to those. Like, I need all four of those things. Sometimes, if I'm not doing very well emotionally and maybe not regulating as well, because we're a co-regulating species, having somebody else there who's like, whoa, you seem like you're having a hard day. What's happening? And letting me just talk for a minute, that can do wonders for how I feel. And so I'm hoping that I'm sure that you have already been intentional in these areas because these are such important areas for all of us who work in this field. And I hope that you will continue to um, become even more intentional in promoting those positive experiences and outcomes. But we want to incorporate multi-generational approaches whenever possible, because it's really hard to ask parents to give to their kids what they never experienced themselves. And, this is where, our work can be so critical, not only for the outcome for that parent, but for that child as well. So, as we know, families are resilient, and, I love that hope celebrates their strengths. And, I hope that, as we look at our intake processes, our screening forms, treatment planning, organizational policies, that we can celebrate the strengths that families bring and that we can think about how we add more